In an age defined by faith and conquest, a new empire would rise from the shadows, forever transforming the destiny of Europe. This is the story of Spain's turbulent rebirth, of kingdoms destroyed, ancient beliefs challenged, and warriors whose names echo through history. From the proud halls of Visigothic kings to the fierce battle cries of Berber invaders, Iberia stood on the edge of a blade, waiting for a storm it did not see coming. In the year 711 AD, the pillars of the old world began to crumble as armies emerged from beyond the sea, carrying a new faith, determined to claim a continent. When Tariq ibn Ziyad led his men across the narrow straits, he faced a land fractured by rivalry and doubt, an empire teetering toward collapse. The Visigothic kingdom, confident in its divine favor, was blind to the peril at its doorstep. Its king, Roderick, marched into battle certain of victory, yet destiny had other plans. What followed was a relentless wave of conquest, a saga written in blood, fire, and the collision of civilizations. Within mere years, ancient cities fell, sacred temples burned, and new rulers replaced old. The proud legacy of Rome and the Visigoths vanished beneath the banners of Al-Andalus. Yet amid the ashes of defeat and conquest, a new order arose, magnificent, ambitious, and complex. A world of splendor, scholarship, and ruthless power struggles was born. Cordoba would rise, radiant in its golden age, becoming Europe's beacon of knowledge and luxury, admired and envied across continents. But before we witness the heights of this great empire, we must journey through its birth, through the desperate cries of fallen kingdoms and the triumphal chants of conquerors. This is not merely a tale of kings and caliphs, nor only of victories and defeats. This is the story of peoples and beliefs clashing in a desperate quest for supremacy and survival, of warriors, scholars, and rulers navigating a new uncertain age. This is the story of Al-Andalus. By the middle of the 8th century, the Iberian Peninsula, known now as Al-Andalus, had fallen firmly under Muslim control. In our previous video exploring the rise and expansion of the Umayyad Caliphate, we covered in depth the initial Islamic conquest of Iberia in 711 AD, led by the Berber commander Tariq ibn Ziyad, as well as the subsequent wars against the Frankish kingdoms, culminating in the decisive Battle of Tours in 732. For 4 decades after the initial conquest in 711, Andalusia remained a distant peripheral province, vulnerable to local rebellions and internal rivalries. But the most dramatic transformation in its history was yet to come, and it would begin with one man's harrowing journey and extraordinary survival. In the year 750, the Umayyad dynasty, the first great ruling house of the Islamic Empire, faced annihilation at the hands of a new rival dynasty, the Abbasids. Their victory was absolute and brutal. Historian Hugh Kennedy, professor of Arabic at SOAS, University of London, describes this pivotal moment starkly. The Abbasids systematically hunted down and eliminated nearly every member of the Umayyad royal family. The dynasty that had ruled the greatest empire on earth was exterminated in a single ruthless purge. Yet one young Umayyad prince, Abd al-Rahman ibn Muawiyah, grandson of the Caliph Hisham, survived. Abd al-Rahman's story, recounted vividly by historian Maribel Fierro, research professor at the Spanish National Research Council, is often likened to that of Aeneas escaping the destruction of Troy. Hunted relentlessly by Abbasid assassins, he fled westward across North Africa, a fugitive prince whose chances of survival seemed impossibly slim. After 5 years on the run, always just a step ahead of his pursuers, Abd al-Rahman finally reached the shores of Iberia in 755. At that moment, Al-Andalus itself was fractured, its rulers bitterly divided by tribal and ethnic tensions between Arabs, Berbers, and Syrians. Abd al-Rahman, still young and without allies, recognized both danger and opportunity in this fragmented landscape. With exceptional diplomatic skill and the undeniable prestige of his Umayyad heritage, he quickly rallied supporters in Andalusia. Fierro highlights Abd al-Rahman's remarkable strategic insight. Though initially powerless, Abd al-Rahman skillfully exploited local rivalries. Promising unity under his leadership, within a year he turned himself from refugee into ruler. In 756, Abd al-Rahman entered Córdoba triumphantly, swiftly overthrowing local governors who had refused his legitimacy. With striking confidence, he declared an independent emirate, severing all political and religious ties to the Abbasid Caliphate. By deliberately refusing to acknowledge Abbasid supremacy, even going as far as banning prayers in their honor, Abd al-Rahman made clear that Al-Andalus would follow its own independent destiny. His boldest statement of independence was the construction of Córdoba's great mosque, the Mezquita. Although built on the foundations of a former Visigothic cathedral dedicated to John the Baptist, Abd al-Rahman's choice of location was as politically symbolic as it was religious. As Fierro explains, by placing the mosque on the site of Córdoba's cathedral, Abd al-Rahman symbolically asserted his sovereignty, announcing that Al-Andalus was no mere province, but a distinct political and religious entity. This decision has sparked vigorous historiographical debate among historians. While traditional narratives portray the mosque's location as evidence of Islamic tolerance and cultural continuity, scholars like Simon R. Doubleday, professor of history at Hofstra University, offer a more nuanced perspective, arguing it represented both cultural continuity and political domination, reflecting the complex, layered identities of early Islamic Spain. Under Abd al-Rahman's rule, Córdoba quickly became an urban and economic powerhouse, rivaling any city in Europe. The city's vibrant markets overflowed with goods from distant lands, reflecting its newfound prosperity and extensive trade networks reaching as far as Byzantium, North Africa, and the Middle East. Yet beneath this prosperity lay complex social dynamics. Abd al-Rahman understood well the necessity of balancing diverse populations: Arabs, Berbers, Syrians, Christians, and Jews. His political acumen ensured relative internal peace despite persistent tensions beneath the surface. By the time of his death in 788, Abd al-Rahman I had laid firm foundations for an enduring civilization. From exile and persecution, he had built a lasting legacy, transforming Iberia from a distant imperial frontier into an independent and self-confident emirate. His heirs would inherit this ambitious vision, elevating Córdoba to even greater heights. Yet the political fractures and ethnic divisions Abd al-Rahman confronted were never truly resolved, simmering just beneath the surface, waiting for a chance to erupt again. And when they did, the consequences would reshape Al-Andalus and Europe forever. By the beginning of the 10th century, the unified state built by Abd al-Rahman I was fragmenting into chaos. Local governors and warlords, both Arab and Berber, openly defied Córdoba, erecting fortresses on every strategic hillside. Central authority was in retreat, and the rich civilization built by the Umayyads seemed poised to collapse. Yet, in 912 AD, a remarkable figure rose to the throne in Córdoba, Abd al-Rahman III, who would restore unity and transform Al-Andalus into Europe's most sophisticated medieval civilization. Born in 889 AD, Abd al-Rahman III ascended the throne at the age of 23. Though he lacked the charisma or battlefield prowess typical of medieval warrior kings, Abd al-Rahman was disciplined, pragmatic, and meticulous. Historian Maribel Fierro, Spanish National Research Council, Madrid, describes him as a leader, defined by his extraordinary organizational talent. Abd al-Rahman III was methodical and systematic. He approached ruling not as a warrior or visionary mystic, but as a masterful administrator who saw order as the foundation of prosperity. His methods were relentless and methodical, city by city, fortress by fortress. Abd al-Rahman systematically crushed local rebellions, dismantled the fortifications of rival warlords, and centralized authority. Historian Hugh Kennedy, professor at SOAS University of London, emphasizes Abd al-Rahman's impact succinctly. What Abd al-Rahman achieved was nothing short of a reconquest, systematically restoring territories that had fragmented under previous rulers. His restoration was less about grand battles than meticulous planning and relentless determination. By 929, Abd al-Rahman had subdued all significant opposition, achieving unprecedented economic prosperity and political stability. Emboldened, he took the decisive step of proclaiming himself Caliph, the highest possible religious and political authority in the Muslim world, in direct defiance of the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad. This act was more than symbolic. It signaled his ambition to transform Córdoba from a provincial capital into a rival of Constantinople and Baghdad. Abd al-Rahman's Córdoba quickly blossomed into Europe's largest city, home to more than 100,000 inhabitants. Córdoba was Europe's largest metropolis, dwarfing Paris or London at the time. Yale historian Maria Rosa Menocal famously describes the city's breathtaking cultural and intellectual environment. Under Abd al-Rahman III, Córdoba was Europe's intellectual beacon, unrivaled in cosmopolitan brilliance. Its libraries, scholars, and lavish courts attracted diplomats and intellectuals from across the known world. To further demonstrate his wealth and ambition, Abd al-Rahman constructed the magnificent palace city of Medina Azahara, just outside Córdoba. It served as a visual statement of imperial authority, much like Versailles centuries later. Visitors, such as John of Gorza, an abbot from the Rhineland, were stunned by its luxurious splendor, writing of elaborate gardens, fountains flowing with fresh water, zoos filled with exotic animals, and even a vast pool of mercury designed to dazzle visiting dignitaries. This spectacle reinforced Abd al-Rahman's imperial image, impressing even distant Christian monarchs and Byzantine emperors. Yet behind this glittering facade lay more complex social realities. Abd al-Rahman III himself embodied the diverse ethnic and religious complexities of Al-Andalus. Though Umayyad on his father's side, his mother was a Frankish Christian concubine, leaving him with blonde hair and blue eyes, features he famously dyed and darkened to better match his Arab ancestry. Historians note this personal insecurity as reflecting broader tensions in Andalusi society, where Arabs, Berbers, Slavs, Christians and Jews coexisted, yet each group occupied clearly defined social positions. This complexity has sparked intense historiographical debates about the nature of tolerance and multiculturalism in Al-Andalus. While scholars like Menocal emphasize the vibrant intellectual and cultural exchanges, historian Simon R. Doubleday, professor at Hofstra University, insists on a more cautious reading. Al-Andalus combined genuine coexistence with carefully maintained social hierarchies. Religious and ethnic boundaries remained strictly enforced, and tolerance always operated within an explicitly Muslim framework. Abd al-Rahman's caliphate, therefore, was no simple multicultural utopia. Its sophisticated administration, global trading networks, and rich intellectual life rested firmly on structures of authority that explicitly privileged Islamic identity and culture. Yet despite its limits, the brilliance of Córdoba under Abd al-Rahman III deeply impressed medieval Europe, setting standards of urban sophistication and governance that would influence European political and cultural ambitions for centuries. In a private diary entry, Abd al-Rahman III poignantly reflected on his own melancholy life, famously writing, "I have diligently numbered the days of pure and genuine happiness which have fallen to my lot. They amount to 14. This melancholy confession provides a haunting personal insight into a man who outwardly embodied the pinnacle of medieval political power, but inwardly remained isolated and dissatisfied, capturing the paradox at the heart of Al-Andalus itself, rich, confident, yet perpetually unstable beneath the surface. Yet his legacy, though complex, is undeniable. By Abd al-Rahman's death in 961, Al-Andalus had become a central node connecting East and West, its influence resonating far beyond its borders, shaping European culture, science, and even political organization. However, the seeds of its eventual collapse had already begun to sprout. After Abd al-Rahman's death, new tensions, growing internal conflicts and aggressive militarization under later leaders would unravel the very prosperity and unity he had painstakingly rebuilt. The dazzling lights of Cordoba's golden age were beginning to dim, setting the stage for the Caliphate's dramatic fall, and with it, the transformation of European history forever. In the popular imagination, Al-Andalus often evokes images of multicultural harmony, a paradise where Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived together peacefully, exchanging knowledge and culture beneath palm trees and babbling fountains. But as historians have extensively debated, the reality of life in medieval Islamic Spain was far more complicated. Indeed, the question of Al-Andalus's supposed tolerance remains one of the most nuanced and passionately argued issues in medieval historiography. Historian Maria Rosa Menocal, professor at Yale University and author of the acclaimed work The Ornament of the World, famously emphasizes Al-Andalus as a rare historical moment of cultural coexistence. Cordoba represented a remarkable medieval experiment where Jews, Christians, and Muslims engaged in unprecedented intellectual collaboration, transcending the strict religious divisions that characterized most of Europe. Menocal highlights the intellectual vibrancy of Cordoba, where scholars of various faiths came together to translate and preserve Greek and Roman texts that would eventually spark Europe's intellectual renaissance centuries later. This vision of Al-Andalus as a haven of scholarly coexistence resonates powerfully with modern audiences seeking historical examples of multicultural harmony. Yet historians caution against romanticizing this narrative. Simon R. Doubleday, professor of medieval history at Hofstra University, argues firmly that multiculturalism in Al-Andalus, though real, was always hierarchical. Tolerance in Al-Andalus existed within clear and legally enforced social hierarchies. Muslims unquestionably held political and social supremacy, while Jews and Christians were protected but distinctly subordinated. Doubleday reminds us that the protection provided to non-Muslims came with clear conditions. Christians and Jews were classified as dhimmis, people of the book, permitted to practice their faiths, but subject to specific taxes and social restrictions under Islamic law. For example, the jizya, a tax mandated by Islamic law on non-Muslims, served as a constant reminder of their inferior social status. The very existence of such a tax, Doubleday points out, indicates that Andalusian tolerance was conditional, never absolute. A poignant reflection of these underlying tensions can be seen clearly in the phenomenon of the martyrs of Cordoba during the mid-9th century. This extraordinary episode involved Christian individuals deliberately provoking the Islamic authorities by publicly denouncing the Prophet Muhammad, seeking martyrdom as a spiritual protest against cultural marginalization. Historian Hugh Kennedy, professor of Arabic at SOAS, University of London, describes these events vividly. The martyrs of Cordoba were symptomatic of the anxieties and tensions underpinning coexistence. While the Islamic authorities were largely uninterested in persecution, Christian defiance indicated profound resistance to cultural assimilation. This martyrdom phenomenon illustrates the limits of multicultural coexistence. While officially tolerated, Christians in Cordoba faced social pressures so severe that they resorted to deliberate martyrdom as an act of spiritual and cultural defiance. The complexity of religious coexistence also extended into scholarly endeavors. The libraries of Cordoba, famously containing hundreds of thousands of volumes, were undoubtedly centers of learning where Muslim, Jewish and Christian scholars interacted. Yet, as historian Hugh Kennedy explains, scholarly exchange did not imply social equality. Jewish and Christian intellectuals were vital to the cultural achievements of Al-Andalus, yet they remained second-class citizens. Their participation, though critical, was always subordinate to the dominant Muslim culture. Still, the scholarly collaboration fostered by this coexistence was crucial for the preservation and transmission of classical knowledge. When Christian forces later retook key cities like Toledo in the 11th century, these translated Greek and Arabic texts profoundly influenced European intellectual history, laying the foundations for the European Renaissance. Thus, the legacy of Al-Andalus as a multicultural haven, though imperfect and hierarchical, undeniably shaped European intellectual history. Ultimately, the debate over tolerance in Al-Andalus reflects broader questions about medieval society itself. Modern views of a tolerant Al-Andalus, historians caution, often project contemporary ideals onto a very different past. Yet, at the same time, entirely dismissing the unique coexistence of Al-Andalus ignores a genuine historical achievement. Despite inherent limitations, Cordoba did represent a rare space of relative religious and cultural exchange unmatched in medieval Europe. In the words of Monocal, this complexity may be exactly what makes Al-Andalus so fascinating. Al-Andalus challenges simplistic interpretations. It was neither paradise nor hell, but something far more intriguing, a society whose complexity still offers profound lessons for today. Thus, Al-Andalus was neither purely utopian nor entirely oppressive, but a nuanced historical example of both the potential and limitations inherent in cultural coexistence. The splendor and prosperity of Cordoba's golden age under Abd al-Rahman III seemed poised to last indefinitely, but beneath the luxurious facade lurked deep vulnerabilities. After Abd al-Rahman III's death, his successors struggled to maintain the empire's internal cohesion, setting the stage for ambitious figures to seize power from behind the throne. Foremost among these was Muhammad ibn Abi Amir, known to history as Al-MANSUR, the Victorious. Born around 938 AD to a relatively modest family, Al-Mansur rose rapidly through the ranks of Cordoba's court, propelled by his intelligence, ruthlessness, and political ambition. Initially appointed as vizier, chief minister, during the reign of the passive Caliph Hisham II, Al-Mansur quickly consolidated control, reducing the caliph himself to a mere symbolic figure confined within his palace walls. Historian Hugh Kennedy, professor of Arabic at SOAS, University of London, captures this transformation succinctly. Under Al-Mansur, the caliphate transformed from a civilian-oriented empire into a highly militarized state, profoundly altering Andalusian politics and society. Unlike Abd al-Rahman III, whose rule emphasized cultural and administrative sophistication, Al-Mansur saw Cordoba's lavish lifestyle as evidence of decadence and moral corruption. Believing deeply in the ideological power of jihad, religious struggle against non-Muslims, he aimed to purify Al-Andalus by returning it to the austere, militaristic values he idealized from Islam's early expansion. This fundamental shift had dramatic consequences. Historian Maribel Fierro, research professor at the Spanish National Research Council, describes Al-Mansur's radical policy changes. Al-Mansur viewed the elite of Córdoba with suspicion, perceiving their wealth and culture as dangerously corrupting. His remedy was aggressive jihad campaigns aimed at external enemies, primarily the Christian kingdoms of northern Iberia. Thus began an era of relentless militarization. Al-Mansur personally led dozens of military campaigns northward into Christian-held territories. His most infamous act occurred in 997 AD, when he sacked the sacred Christian pilgrimage site of Santiago de Compostela, a profoundly symbolic humiliation. The city's cathedral was looted, its bells stripped and carried back to Córdoba by Christian captives who were forced to bear these trophies as symbols of their subjugation. Hugh Kennedy emphasizes the symbolic significance. The sacking of Santiago de Compostela represented not only military conquest, but a calculated psychological attack intended to demoralize Christian Europe. Yet this constant warfare and aggressive jihad created significant internal stresses. To maintain his military machine, Al-Mansur increasingly relied on mercenary soldiers, particularly Berbers from North Africa. While militarily effective, these mercenary forces intensified existing ethnic and social tensions within Al-Andalus. Historian Simon R. Doubleday, professor of history at Hofstra University, notes the deeper implications of Al-Mansur's reliance on Berbers. By bringing in Berber mercenaries, Al-Mansur unknowingly exacerbated the ethnic divisions already simmering within Andalusian society. These tensions would eventually tear Córdoba apart. Indeed, the decision to integrate these Berber soldiers proved a grave miscalculation. Resented by Andalusians who saw them as violent outsiders, consuming resources and exacerbating local taxation, the Berbers increasingly felt alienated and exploited by the Andalusian elite. This mutual suspicion would later explode catastrophically into open conflict after Al-Mansur's death. Moreover, Al-Mansur's ideological zeal extended beyond external conquests. Internally, he initiated aggressive religious purges, targeting scholars he suspected of heresy. Works deemed controversial were burned publicly, and dissident intellectuals faced persecution, imprisonment, or even execution. Córdoba's celebrated intellectual freedom and cosmopolitan openness began to give way to a narrower, more intolerant cultural atmosphere. Historian Maria Rosa Menocal, Yale University, acknowledges the stark change brought about by Al-Mansur's strict policies. Under Al-Mansur, the vibrant intellectual climate of Córdoba became constrained. A new rigidity took hold, threatening the very cultural diversity that had previously defined Andalusi society. Yet paradoxically, despite this internal tightening, Al-Mansur's reign marked the peak of Córdoba's territorial expansion. Never had Andalusi armies penetrated so deeply and so frequently into northern Iberia. Militarily, Al-Mansur appeared invincible, hence his title, the Victorious. However, his victories carried hidden costs. The militarization of society drained economic resources, eroded social cohesion, and left Al-Andalus exhausted. Al-Mansur's death in 1002 triggered an immediate crisis, as the powerful military apparatus he constructed was too dependent on his personal authority and charisma. His son and successor, Abd al-Malik al-Muzaffar, inherited a dangerously unstable regime propped up by force alone. In reflecting upon Al-Mansur's legacy, Hugh Kennedy summarizes the historian's debate regarding his ultimate impact on Al-Andalus. Al-Mansur was unquestionably successful as a conqueror, but his militarization ultimately destabilized the entire caliphate, planting seeds for its rapid fragmentation after his death. Thus, the militarization of Al-Andalus under Al-Mansur, though initially appearing strong and successful, inadvertently set the stage for the caliphate's collapse. The aggressive pursuit of jihad, combined with internal ethnic tensions and authoritarian control, pushed Cordoba's society to the brink. When the charismatic warrior died, the carefully balanced yet fragile political structure unraveled rapidly, leading to civil war, internal violence, and the catastrophic fragmentation of Andalusia into vulnerable Taifa kingdoms. What Al-Mansur intended as purification instead ushered in an era of chaos and violence, permanently ending Cordoba's golden age and paving the way for the Christian Reconquista that would forever alter Europe's history. The death of Al-Mansur in 1002 left Al-Andalus powerful yet dangerously unstable. His militarized state had depended on the force of his personality, leaving no lasting institutional stability. After his passing, power passed to his son Abd al-Malik al-Muzaffar, who, despite his own military successes, was less capable politically and increasingly dependent on mercenaries and factional alliances. Upon Abd al-Malik's death in 1008, the caliphate descended into a power struggle marked by bitter ethnic rivalries, palace intrigues, and ultimately civil war, the FITNA. The pivotal figure in these chaotic events was Muhammad ibn Abi Amir, known contemptuously by contemporaries as Sanchuelo, a nickname referencing his Christian ancestry, underscoring the deeply entrenched ethnic prejudices of Cordoba's society. Sanchuelo's decision to demand that the passive and isolated Caliph Hisham II name him heir further inflamed tensions. His attempts to impose Berber cultural practices, such as wearing distinctive Berber turbans, upon the Andalusian elite, ignited a political powder keg. Historian Hugh Kennedy vividly describes this moment of crisis. When Sanchuelo imposed Berber fashions and customs on the Andalusian court, he unleashed latent ethnic hostilities that had been simmering for decades. The resentment exploded when Sanchuelo, absent on military campaign, left Cordoba vulnerable. The Andalusian elite, disgusted by his heavy-handed rule, seized their opportunity. Led by rival Umayyad claimants, the city's citizens rebelled, deposed the figurehead Caliph Hisham II, and brutally executed Sanchuelo upon his return. But the violence did not stop there. The new rulers, eager to solidify their power and motivated by decades of accumulated resentment, turned their anger toward the large Berber community within Cordoba. In a horrific wave of ethnic violence, a bounty was placed on the head of every Berber. Cordoba became a scene of unimaginable carnage. Thousands of Berbers were massacred in the streets, their bodies displayed publicly as warnings. Maribel Fierro, Spanish National Research Council, describes these atrocities as a grim outpouring of pent-up ethnic hatred, noting that women were enslaved and abused, while even pregnant Berber women fell victim to unspeakable brutality. Yet, as is often the case with violence, the massacres triggered immediate repercussions. Berber warriors, outraged by these atrocities, rallied outside the city and returned to exact vengeance. In 1010, Cordoba found itself under siege. A city that had once dazzled the world now brought to its knees. 3 years of starvation, cannibalism, and desperation followed, as historian Simon Doubleday notes with poignant clarity. The siege of Cordoba exposed the fragility beneath its golden exterior. Amid the hunger, disease, and terror, Cordoba's illustrious civilization crumbled, never to fully recover. When Berber forces finally broke through in 1013, Cordoba was brutally sacked, stripped of its treasures and ravaged by violence. Thousands were slaughtered, palaces and libraries burned, and the magnificent city reduced to ashes. Historian Maribel Fierro succinctly summarizes this decisive turning point. The sack of Córdoba was more than just the end of a dynasty. It shattered the symbolic unity that had held Al-Andalus together, plunging the region into permanent division. From this devastation, the caliphate never recovered. Although nominal Umayyad caliphs continued to be proclaimed, they were mere puppets, powerless figures ruling over empty palaces. Córdoba, once Europe's brightest cultural beacon, rapidly descended into political insignificance. Instead, Al-Andalus splintered into dozens of smaller competing kingdoms known as the Taifa states, each ruled by ambitious local leaders who abandoned any pretense of unity. The fragmentation of the caliphate had monumental historical consequences. Without centralized power, these Taifa kingdoms were economically prosperous, but politically weak and militarily vulnerable. Christian kingdoms to the north, particularly Castile, Leon, and Aragon, seized the opportunity presented by this vulnerability, initiating an aggressive and relentless campaign of reconquest, known today as the Reconquista. Hugh Kennedy highlights this historical shift clearly. The FITNA marked the true beginning of the Reconquista. Al-Andalus's fragmentation directly enabled Christian kingdoms to expand southward, reshaping the medieval geopolitical map of Europe. From this point forward, the history of Iberia became a story of gradual yet relentless Christian advance, driven both by religious zeal and political opportunism. The consequences extended far beyond Iberia's borders, impacting European identity, cultural boundaries, and the rise of nation-states, ultimately laying the foundations for modern Europe's religious, cultural, and political divisions. Thus, the Fitna was more than just civil war. It represented a critical pivot in European history. The destruction of Córdoba's central authority and its resulting fragmentation shaped centuries of conflict, ultimately driving historical currents that reached far beyond the Iberian Peninsula, currents whose influence can still be felt today. The dramatic rise and catastrophic collapse of Al-Andalus profoundly reshaped Europe's historical trajectory. At its height, Córdoba had stood as the cultural and intellectual heart of medieval Europe, radiating influence far beyond the Iberian Peninsula. Yet its violent fall and the subsequent fragmentation into competing Taifa kingdoms signaled a historic turning point, unleashing forces that would permanently alter Europe's destiny. Historian Maria Rosa Menocal, Yale University, succinctly captures Al-Andalus's enduring cultural significance. The civilization of Al-Andalus was more than just an exotic interlude in European history. It served as a crucial bridge linking the classical world to medieval and early modern Europe, transmitting knowledge, science, and philosophy that profoundly shaped Europe's intellectual rebirth. Indeed, the scientific and cultural achievements of Andalusi society, spanning astronomy, mathematics, medicine, architecture, and literature, were pivotal in facilitating the Renaissance that would eventually flourish centuries later. Al-Andalus preserved and expanded upon Greek, Persian, and Roman knowledge, introducing sophisticated agricultural techniques, urban planning methods, and administrative structures that profoundly influenced European states emerging in its aftermath. Yet the legacy of Al-Andalus extends far beyond cultural and intellectual influences alone. Its political fragmentation following the brutal Fitna Wars radically reshaped Iberian geopolitics. Historian Hugh Kennedy, professor of Arabic at SOAS, University of London, emphasizes this shift clearly. The collapse of the Caliphate transformed Al-Andalus from a unified political entity into a collection of vulnerable, competing Taifa states. This vulnerability directly empowered the Christian kingdoms of northern Iberia, catalyzing their southward expansion and initiating the historical process we know today as the Reconquista. The Reconquista, fueled by religious fervor and political ambition, fundamentally altered Europe's identity. It solidified a militant Christianity, establishing clear and permanent cultural and religious boundaries between the Christian North and the Muslim South. This process laid the groundwork for the emergence of powerful European kingdoms, Castile, Leon, Aragon, and later Portugal, whose eventual unification into nation-states profoundly influenced European and global history. Moreover, the Reconquista directly spurred further European expansionism beyond Iberia itself. Simon R. Doubleday, professor of history at Hofstra University, describes this process vividly. The Christian conquest of Al-Andalus not only redrew the map of Iberia, it also set the stage for European colonialism. The ambitions, skills, and ideologies developed in Iberia's Reconquista were soon applied beyond Europe's shores, launching an era of global exploration, conquest, and empire. Indeed, the experience gained during the centuries-long Reconquista, militarily, culturally, and politically, provided invaluable lessons to Iberian kingdoms, which, immediately after reclaiming their territory, embarked upon voyages of discovery and conquest across the Atlantic. Thus, the story of Al-Andalus and its fall is deeply interconnected with the birth of Europe's global colonial empires. Historiographical debates surrounding Al-Andalus further illustrate its complexity. While some historians, such as Menachal, emphasize its coexistence and cultural exchange as lessons for modern multicultural societies, others, like Doubleday, caution against idealizing its complexities. Doubleday emphasizes the nuanced realities. Al-Andalus teaches us that multicultural coexistence, while possible and productive, inevitably occurs within power dynamics. Understanding its successes and failures allows us to appreciate both its potential and limitations. Ultimately, Al-Andalus's enduring legacy lies precisely in its complexity. It reveals the profound historical tensions between tolerance and domination, unity and fragmentation, coexistence and conflict. As Menachal poetically reflects, the lost civilization of Al-Andalus forces us to confront history's nuances. It reminds us that the past, like the present, defies easy categorization. Its true legacy is perhaps this very complexity, an enduring reminder that civilizations flourish best when they embrace diversity while navigating its inevitable tensions. Today, the echoes of Al-Andalus continue to resonate in Europe's cultural imagination, political boundaries, and collective memory. Its story remains a potent symbol of both the possibilities and the dangers inherent in cultural and political coexistence. As modern Europe continues grappling with cultural diversity, religious tensions, and shifting geopolitical identities, the lessons of Al-Andalus remain strikingly relevant. Thus, while the physical monuments of Córdoba's golden age may lie largely in ruins, the intellectual and cultural bridges it built and the geopolitical consequences of its fall continue shaping European civilization, reminding us that history is never simply about the past, but always about understanding our complex present and informing our uncertain future. If you've enjoyed this exploration into the rise and fall of Al-Andalus and how it shaped Europe's history, don't stop here. Dive deeper into the extraordinary story of Islam's historical journey by watching our other carefully crafted videos. Explore the early origins of Islam, follow the rapid expansion of the first caliphates, and witness the dramatic battles, legendary cities, and intellectual revolutions that defined an era. Our series on the history of Islam provides nuanced, accurate, and captivating insights into one of history's greatest civilizations. Click on the links provided, subscribe to our channel, and continue discovering how Islam has profoundly shaped our world, yesterday and today.